This isn't a fairy tale. For Serafina Lancaster, it was a waking nightmare. She gave her husband Garrett 2 decades of her life, helping him build a billion-dollar empire, only to be publicly discarded for a younger woman. She was expected to fade away, a forgotten chapter in the great man's biography. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They underestimated her. They thought she was just the wife. They had no idea she was the one who held all the power. What you're about to hear is the story of how one woman turned the greatest betrayal of her life into the most spectacular revenge, using their wedding reception as the stage for her corporate coup. The late afternoon sun, the color of burnt honey, slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, glinting off the crystal flutes of champagne. From 34 floors above Chicago, the city sprawled out like a circuit board of dreams and ambitions. For 20 years, this had been Serafina Lancaster's view. But today, it felt alien, a landscape from someone else's life. The champagne in her hand had long since gone warm. Its bubbles vanished. Across the cavernous living room, a space decorated in sterile shades of grey and chrome that had always felt more like a corporate lobby than a home her husband Garrett Lancaster was holding court. He was a man sculpted by success, his tailored suit unable to conceal the raw, restless energy that had propelled him from a junior analyst to the CEO of Lancaster Holdings, a global logistics behemoth. His laugh, a booming sound that always commanded attention, echoed off the marble floors. He was celebrating the closing of the Oakhaven deal, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would put Lancaster Holdings on the cover of Forbes once again. Serafina watched him, a ghost at her own party. She had planned this event, as she had planned all of them, with meticulous, invisible precision. She'd selected the caterer, a Michelin-starred outfit, flown in from New York, approved the floral arrangements of sterile white orchids, and curated the guest list of industry titans and their dazzling, hungry wives. She was the perfect corporate spouse, elegant, poised, and utterly silent, a beautiful breathing accessory to her husband's greatness. Her gaze drifted to the woman standing just a little too close to Garrett Colette Dubois. Colette was the company's head of a woman half Serafina's age, with ambition that burned in her eyes like a pilot light. She was all sharp angles and modern beauty, with a sleek black bob and a smile that was both predatory and dazzling. She touched Garrett's arm as she laughed at his joke, a casual, proprietary gesture that sent a familiar shard of ice through Serafina's heart. This had been going on for 2 years. At first, it was just a whisper, a change in Garrett's schedule, the scent of a different perfume on his shirts. Then came the late-night meetings, the sudden business trips. Serafina had seen the credit card statements, the hotel bookings for 2 in cities where Lancaster Holdings had no business. She had seen the way Colette looked at her husband, not with the quiet partnership of a colleague, but with the triumphant gleam of a conqueror. Serafina had said nothing. What was there to say? In their world, a wife's primary duty was to maintain the facade. A messy divorce, a public scandal, it was bad for the brand. Garrett was the brand, and she, by extension, was its silent, smiling guardian. So she played her part, hosting his dinners, smiling at his side, and slowly, quietly ding inside their gilded cage. The party began to thin out as evening bled into night. The city lights below twinkled a sea of distant stars. Finally, only the 3 of them remained in the vast, silent room. The catering staff moved with spectral quiet, clearing away the remnants of the celebration. A triumph, wouldn't you say? Garrett said, finally turning his attention to Serafina. He loosened his tie, his face flushed with champagne and victory. Oakhaven is ours. They never knew what hit them. It was a masterful negotiation. Garrett Colette added her voice, a low purr. She moved to the bar and poured him a whiskey, her movements fluid and confident. She didn't offer Serafina one. It certainly was. Serafina replied, her voice even. She placed her untouched champagne flute on a passing tray. Congratulations. Garrett took the whiskey from Colette, his fingers brushing against hers. He took a long swallow, his eyes finding Serafina's over the rim of the glass. There was something different in his gaze tonight. Not the usual casual neglect, but a cold, decisive finality. Serafina. We need to talk, he said. Colette smirked, a flicker of victory crossing her face before she schooled it into an expression of faux sympathy. She took a step back, positioning herself near the fireplace, a silent witness to the execution. I think it's time we were all honest, Garrett continued, pacing in front of the window. This arrangement between us hasn't been working for a long time. We've been living separate lives under the same roof. It's a sham. Serafina remained silent, her hands clasped in front of her. She felt strangely calm, the way a sailor does when the storm they've been tracking on the horizon finally breaks. I'm in love with Colette, he said the words blunt and brutal. I want to be with her. I want to build a real life, a passionate life. I'm tired of this. He gestured vaguely at the opulent room at Serafina, as if she were just another piece of expensive, soulless furniture. I see, Serafina said, her voice betraying no emotion. I've instructed my lawyers at Thornton and Beck to draw up the divorce papers, Garrett went on, gaining momentum now that the hardest words were out. They'll be in touch with yours. I intend to be generous, of course. You'll be very comfortable. A clean break. It's for the best. He looked at her, expecting tears, a scene, a plea. He saw none of it. He saw only a strange, unnerving stillness. It was Colette who broke the silence, stepping forward and placing a hand on Garrett's shoulder. We didn't want to hurt you, Serafina, she said, her voice dripping with insincere sorrow. We just couldn't fight this. Love is love. Serafina's gaze shifted to Colette, and for the first time that evening, a flicker of something raw and powerful surfaced in her eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was something far, far colder. You're right, Serafina said softly, her words hanging in the air like frost. You can't fight it, and one should always be honest. She stood up, her posture regal. Thank you for your honesty, Garrett. I'll await the papers from your lawyers. She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The image was already seared into her mind. Her husband and his mistress, standing together in the monument to a life she had helped build, looking for all the world like a king and queen, surveying their new kingdom. But kingdoms, Serafina knew, could fall, and they rarely saw the hand that toppled them until it was too late. The day after the party, the divorce papers arrived. They were delivered by a brisk, impersonal courier and landed with a soft thud on the antique mahogany desk in Serafina's private study. This room, tucked away in a quiet wing of the penthouse, was her sanctuary. Unlike the rest of the apartment, it was warm and personal, filled with books, antique maps, and the faint, comforting scent of old paper and lemon verbena tea. This was the one space Garrett never entered, dismissing it as cluttered and unproductive. It was here that the real Serafina Lancaster resided. She didn't open the thick envelope from Thornton and Beck immediately. Instead, she sat for a long moment, looking at the name of the law firm. Garrett's Bulldogs. Known for their aggressive take-no-prisoners approach to corporate and divorce law. He was expecting her to hire a comparable firm, setting the stage for a bitter, protracted battle over assets that would ultimately end with her signing a lucrative but soul-crushing non-disclosure agreement. He thought he knew the game. He had no idea she was playing an entirely different one. Finally, she picked up her phone, but she didn't call a divorce attorney. She dialed a number that was not saved in her contacts, a number she had committed to memory years ago. It rang twice before a dry, calm voice answered. "Yes, Phineas," Serafina said, her own voice steady. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end, then a soft chuckle. I must admit, I was beginning to wonder if he'd ever be foolish enough to make his move. The Oakhaven deal, I presume. The ego is sufficiently inflated. Phineas Croft was Serafina's grandfather's most trusted advisor, a man who had been the chief counsel for Ethelred Capital for 40 years. Her grandfather, a legendary investor named Donovan Croft, hadn't just left her a fortune. He had left her an education. While Garrett had been learning to climb the corporate ladder, Donovan had been teaching Serafina how to own the entire building. He'd taught her about shell corporations, proxy votes, and the subtle art of leveraging power from the shadows. Sufficiently is an understatement. Serafina replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. He announced his intentions last night. He and his PR head, Colette Dubois. He wants a clean break. He'll get a break, Phineas said wryly. But I doubt he'll find it clean. The Serafina Trust is fully matured. Your voting shares in Lancaster Holdings now stand at 51.8%. The final block was acquired discreetly last Tuesday, using the Northwood Holdings shell. He is, for all intents and purposes, your employee. Serafina closed her eyes, a wave of vindication washing over her. For years following her grandfather's posthumous instructions, managed by the ever-loyal Phineas, she had been using her inheritance to systematically and silently buy up stock in her own husband's company. It had started as a safety net, a strategy her grandfather had insisted upon when she first married the charming, ambitious Garrett. "Never let your security rest in a man's hands, my dear," he had told her. "Let it rest in a diversified portfolio and a controlling interest." Over the years, as Garrett's ambition morphed into arrogance and his affections strayed, the defensive strategy had slowly morphed into an offensive one. She had watched him leverage the company to the hilt for risky ventures like the Oakhaven deal, all while feeling smugly secure in his own perceived genius. He never once thought to check the ownership structure of the myriad of smaller investment firms that held his company's stock. He was too busy looking at the headlines to read the fine print. "I want to proceed exactly as we discussed," Phineas Serafina said, her voice now sharp with purpose. "No sudden moves, no hostile announcements. Let him think he's in complete control. Let him file the papers. Let him believe I'm just a discarded wife preparing to fight for her alimony." "And the wedding?" Phineas asked. A genuine cold smile spread across Serafina's face. "Oh, he'll have his wedding. I imagine it will be the social event of the season. I want him to have everything he thinks he's ever wanted. I want him standing at the absolute pinnacle of his triumph. The higher the climb, the harder the fall." Phineas quoted approvingly. "I'll have the team at Whitlock and Finch on standby. They are the best in corporate governance and utterly discreet. They will represent your interests not as a wife, but as the majority shareholder. Thank you, Phineas, for everything. Your grandfather would be immensely proud, Serafina." He always said you had a better mind for this than Garrett ever did. You just had more patience. After the call, Serafina finally opened the envelope from Thornton and Beck. She scanned the documents, the legal jargon a blur. It was a standard if aggressive proposal. He was offering her the penthouse a lump sum of $20 million and a yearly alimony of $500,000, all contingent on the NDA. It was a fortune to most, but it was a pittance compared to the true value of the empire. It was an insult disguised as generosity. She folded the papers neatly and placed them in a drawer. She wouldn't be needing them. In the weeks that followed, Serafina played her part to perfection. She moved out of the penthouse and into a luxurious suite at the Peninsula Chicago. A move Garrett saw as the retreat of a defeated woman. She hired a well-known but ultimately second-tier divorce lawyer, a man known for settling, not for fighting. They exchanged proposals. Her lawyer, on her instructions, made a counteroffer that was slightly higher, but still within the realm of a typical billionaire's divorce. Garrett, blinded by his own ego and Colette's triumphant whispers, saw it all as a predictable script. He told Colette that Serafina was being sensible, that she knew she couldn't win. He was too busy planning his glorious future to notice the storm gathering on the horizon. He and Colette set a date for their wedding, a lavish affair to be held in 6 months at the historic Greystone Manor on the shores of Lake Michigan. The invitations, thick cream cardstock with gold leaf lettering, were sent to everyone who mattered in their world. One afternoon, as Serafina was having tea in her hotel suite, a package arrived. It was one of the wedding invitations. She stared at the elegant calligraphy, her name inscribed on the inner envelope. It was a final, breathtaking act of cruelty and arrogance. He wasn't just divorcing her. He was inviting her to witness her own replacement. A lesser woman would have torn it to shreds. A lesser woman would have wept. Serafina simply picked up her phone and sent a message to the wedding planner, an old acquaintance. "Dearest Genevieve," she typed. "I was so touched to receive the invitation. Of course I will be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." She then sent another text, this one to Phineas. "The invitation has arrived. The stage is set." He replied moments later. "Excellent. All assets are in position. The board has been primed. They are growing nervous about Garrett's cavalier leadership style post-Oakhaven. They are ripe for a change. All they need is a new leader to emerge." Serafina looked out the window at the city. It didn't look so alien anymore. It looked like a kingdom waiting for its true queen. The day of the wedding dawned with a sky of brilliant, unblemished blue, a perfect, pathetic fallacy for Garrett Lancaster's mood. He felt on top of the world, a modern-day king about to marry his queen and solidify his dynasty. Greystone Manor was a testament to his power, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the sparkling expanse of Lake Michigan. He had spared no expense. A string quartet played Vivaldi as guests arrived. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of imported white roses, and champagne flowed from fountains flanking the grand entrance. Colette was a vision in a custom Vera Wang gown, a confection of silk and lace that clung to her slender frame. Her smile was incandescent, her eyes shining with a victor's light. She had won. She had supplanted the quiet, elegant Serafina, and now stood beside the man who controlled one of the country's most formidable corporations. Today was her coronation. The guest list was a who's who of finance, politics, and industry. Board members of Lancaster Holdings mingled with hedge fund managers and senators. They clapped Garrett on the back, congratulating him on his beautiful bride and his recent business triumphs. The whispers about his divorce, were just that whispers tinged with a grudging admiration for the man's audacity. He had managed it all so cleanly, so efficiently. And then, just as the ceremony was about to begin, a quiet ripple of shock moved through the crowd. A black Bentley, discreet and impossibly elegant, rolled up the long gravel driveway. The chauffeur, a man who had driven for Serafina's family for 30 years, opened the door. Serafina emerged. She was not dressed in black, the traditional color of mourning or scorn. Instead, she wore a bespoke suit of sapphire blue silk, tailored to perfection. It was a power suit, not a victim's dress. Her hair was swept up in a flawless chignon, and a single magnificent sapphire necklace, the legendary Star of Geneva. A Croft family heirloom rested in the hollow of her throat. It was a piece Garrett had always coveted, a symbol of the old world wealth and power he could never quite attain. She looked not like a woman scorned, but like a woman in charge. A hush fell over the assembled guests. Jaws literally dropped. Garrett, standing at the altar, felt a jolt, as if the flawless day had suddenly cracked. He hadn't truly believed she would come. He had sent the invitation as a final triumphant jab, a way to underscore his victory. He had expected her to decline, or better yet, to ignore it, confirming her irrelevance. Her presence here, looking like this, was an act of defiance he couldn't comprehend. Colette's perfect smile faltered. A flicker of insecurity, hot and unwelcome, coursed through her. This was her day. What was she doing here, looking so regal? It was unsettling. Serafina glided through the crowd, her expression serene, offering polite, knowing smiles to the familiar faces who stared at her, with a mixture of pity and awe. She nodded at board members' men who had sat in her dining room and praised her hostessing skills. She saw the questions in their eyes, the sudden recalculations. She took a seat in the third row, a respectable distance yet undeniably present. She didn't need to be in the front row. Her presence alone was a statement that echoed louder than any protest. Throughout the ceremony, she sat with a look of placid interest, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on the proceedings. She watched as Garrett and Colette exchanged vows, her face an unreadable mask of cool elegance. When Garrett said, "I do," his voice, for the first time that day, lacked its usual booming confidence. He glanced toward Serafina, but she simply met his gaze, her blue eyes as cool and deep as the lake behind them. There was no pain in them, no anger, just a profound, unnerving calm. It was the calm of a chess master who sees the board 20 moves ahead. At the reception held in the Manor's magnificent ballroom, the tension was a palpable thing. The string quartet had been replaced by a full jazz orchestra, but the music felt strained, unable to cover the nervous energy in the room. Guests kept casting furtive glances at Serafina, who was holding court at a small table with a few older, distinguished-looking gentlemen. Garrett recognized them with a jolt. Lord Ashworth, a major institutional investor from London, and Franklin Reed, the notoriously reclusive head of a Swiss private equity firm. What were they doing with her Colette? Now Mrs. Lancaster tried to ignore it, clinging to Garrett's arm, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. "Can you believe the nerve?" she hissed under the music, trying to upstage me at my own wedding. "It's pathetic." Garrett wasn't so sure. Pathetic was not the word he would use to describe the woman in the sapphire suit. For the first time, a worm of doubt squirmed in his gut. He had managed his divorce from Serafina with what he thought was ruthless efficiency, but he had managed it through lawyers and intermediaries. He hadn't actually spoken to her, Not really since that night in the penthouse. He had assumed her silence was weakness. Now, watching her command the attention of men like Ashworth and Reed, he wondered if it had been something else entirely. The traditional toasts began. The best man, a college friend of Garrett's, gave a rambling, boozy speech. The maid of honor, Colette's sister, gushed about finding a soulmate. Then Garrett himself took the microphone. He stood in the center of the dance floor, bathed in a warm spotlight, Colette at his side. He thanked their guests, praised his new wife's beauty and brilliance, and spoke of a future filled with passion and success. Then, in a move of supreme arrogance, a final twist of the knife he couldn't resist, he addressed the elephant in the room. "I also want to take a moment to acknowledge my past," he began, his voice smooth and magnanimous, "and to thank my former wife, Serafina, for her service over the years. Our divorce was amicable, and I wish her nothing but the best. Her presence here today is a testament to the maturity and grace with which we've both handled this transition." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." A smattering of polite, uncomfortable applause followed. He was painting her as the docile, accepting ex-wife, graciously passing the torch. He was putting her in her place. He handed the microphone to the wedding planner, Genevieve, who seemed flustered by the undercurrent in the room. Perhaps trying to smooth things over to play into Garrett's narrative of amicability, Genevieve made a fateful, unscripted decision. "That was beautiful, Garrett," she said into the mic, her voice trembling slightly. "And it's so wonderful to see such modern sensibilities. Serafina, you look so lovely. I wonder if you might not like to say a few words as well. To wish the happy couple well." A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. All eyes swiveled to Serafina. It was a horrifyingly awkward suggestion, a social grenade. Colette's face went white with fury. Garrett's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. He had written the script, and this was not in it. Serafina, however, didn't look flustered at all. She looked ready. She gave Genevieve a small, reassuring smile. Then, with the poise of a queen ascending her throne, she stood up and began to walk toward the stage. The jazz orchestra faltered into silence. The only sound in the vast, opulent room was the soft, deliberate click of Serafina Lancaster's heels on the polished marble floor. The walk from her table to the center of the ballroom felt both infinitely long and charged with an electric oral silence. Every eye was on Serafina. The air, which moments before had been filled with music and chatter, was now so still and heavy it felt like the moments before a lightning strike. The world seemed to have shrunk to this one room, to this one woman in a sapphire suit, walking calmly towards the microphone that had just been used to dismiss her. Garrett's heart hammered against his ribs. This was a disaster, a public relations nightmare. He shot a venomous look at the wedding planner, Genevieve, whose face was now a mask of pure horror at what she had unleashed. Colette stood frozen, her hand gripping Garrett's arm, like a vice, her knuckles white. Her fairy tale wedding was curdling into a public spectacle, and she was no longer the star. Serafina reached the microphone. She didn't snatch it, but took it gently from Genevieve's trembling hand, giving the terrified woman a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. She adjusted the stand to her height, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces. The board members, the investors, the society swans, the reporters from business journals who had been invited to chronicle the glorious union. Her eyes finally rested on Garrett and Colette, standing there in the spotlight like two statues in a diorama of their own making. She smiled. It was a warm, disarming smile that seemed to instantly put the room at ease. Thank you, Genevieve. She began, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent hall. And thank you, Garrett, for your kind words. A clean break and new beginnings. These are powerful phrases. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. She was going to be gracious. She was going to take the high road, wish them well, and this excruciating moment would be over. Garrett felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps he had misjudged her. Perhaps she would simply play the part he had assigned her. I have always believed in the importance of new beginnings. Serafina continued, her tone conversational, almost intimate. They are opportunities for growth, for re-evaluation, for sweeping away the old and inefficient to make way for the bold and the new. It's a philosophy that applies as much to life as it does to business. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. She turned her gaze slightly, looking towards the table, where Lord Ashworth and Franklin Reed sat watching her with rapt attention. Garrett and I shared 20 years together, and in that time I didn't just plan parties and select floral arrangements. I watched. I learned. I learned about the company he was building. Lancaster Holdings, a fine name, a strong company, a company built on bold moves and in recent years, increasingly bold risks. Garrett's blood ran cold. This was not the speech of a gracious ex-wife. This was something else entirely. The Oakhaven acquisition, for example. Serafina said, her voice taking on a new, sharper edge. A triumph, Garrett called it. And it was a triumph of ambition. But it was also a triumph that has left the company dangerously over-leveraged, a fact that has made many of our investors quite concerned. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not cocktail party chatter. This was inside information being aired in public with surgical precision. Colette tugged at Garrett's arm. "Make her stop!" She hissed, her voice a panicked whisper. But Garrett was paralyzed, caught in the headlights of Serafina's calm, devastating monologue. Garrett spoke of my service to him. Serafina went on, turning her gaze back to him. And I did serve him. But what he seems to have forgotten is who I truly served. My primary duty was never just to my husband. It was to my family's legacy. A legacy of prudent, strategic investment. A legacy of protecting one's assets. She let a beat of silence pass, holding the entire room in the palm of her hand. When I married Garrett, my grandfather, Donovan Croft, whose name some of you may remember from the founding days of Ethelred Capital, gave me some advice. He told me to never let my future be solely in the hands of another. He established a trust for me, a discreet private trust with a very specific long-term mandate. Her eyes locked onto Garrett's. The genial mask had fallen away, replaced by a look of dawning, gut-wrenching horror. He was finally starting to understand. The blood drained from his face. For 20 years, Serafina announced, her voice as clear and hard as a diamond. The trust under the expert management of Phineas Croft has been quietly, patiently, and strategically acquiring shares in Lancaster Holdings. It has purchased shares through various funds and holding companies. Northwood Holdings, Argent, Asset Management, even a small percentage through Lord Ashworth's firm here. She nodded graciously at the British lord, who nodded back. Garrett was so focused on the horizon, she said, her voice laced with a cold pity, that he never bothered to look at the shareholder registry. He never asked who was behind the anonymous-sounding firms that were so eager to invest in his vision. She took a small breath, preparing for the kill shot. So while I do wish you a new beginning, Colette, she said, turning to the younger woman, whose face was now a crumbling facade of disbelief, I'm afraid Garrett's new beginning will look quite different from what he imagined. Serafina's voice dropped, becoming crisp and corporate, the voice of a CEO delivering a verdict. As of last Tuesday, the final block of shares was acquired, which means that the Serafina Croft Trust is now the majority shareholder of Lancaster Holdings, with a controlling interest of 51.8%. A collective gasp, like the sound of 100 lungs being punched at once, echoed through the ballroom. It was a sonic boom of shock and disbelief. Therefore, Serafina concluded, her voice ringing with indisputable authority, I am using my right as the majority shareholder to call an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors for this Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. The primary item on the agenda will be a full review of current executive leadership and a vote on the appointment of a new chief executive officer. She smiled one last brilliant, chilling smile. Congratulations to the happy couple. Please enjoy the salmon. And with that, she placed the microphone back on its stand, turned and walked away from the epicenter of the explosion she had just detonated. The charade was over. The unveiling was complete. For a long, suspended moment, the ballroom was trapped in a state of collective paralysis. The only sound was the faint, apologetic hum of the air conditioning. Serafina's words hung in the air, glittering and venomous like shards of shattered glass. Majority shareholder. Emergency board meeting. New CEO. The phrases detonated one by one in the minds of the stunned guests. Then chaos erupted. It wasn't a loud, screaming chaos, but a frantic high society implosion. The low murmur of shock exploded into a cacophony of urgent, hushed conversations. Cell phones previously tucked away in designer clutches and suit pockets were suddenly in every hand. Investors were frantically texting their brokers. Board members, pale and tight-lipped, were huddled together, their expressions a mixture of fury and fear. The reporters in the room were typing furiously into their phones, their journalistic instincts overriding any sense of social decorum. They knew they were witnessing the corporate scoop of the decade. At the center of the maelstrom, Garrett and Colette stood as if turned to stone. The warm, adoring spotlight that had bathed them in glory now felt like a harsh, unforgiving interrogation lamp. Colette's dream, her triumphant ascent, had dissolved into a public crucifixion in the space of a 5-minute speech. Her Vera Wang gown suddenly felt like a costume for a tragedy. Her face, which had been a canvas of bridal bliss, was now a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. "Do something!" she shrieked at Garrett. Her voice a ragged, ugly sound that cut through the din. "This is my wedding. You let her ruin my wedding." But Garrett couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His mind was a maelstrom of denial and dawning, terrifying comprehension. Serafina. Quiet, demure, predictable Serafina. The woman he had dismissed as a relic, a part of his past. He was neatly excising. He had thought he was divorcing a wife, not a titan. 51.8%. The number pulsed in his brain like a migraine. It was an impossible, ludicrous figure. He was Garrett Lancaster. He was Lancaster Holdings. He had built it with his own 2 hands, his own sweat, his own genius. How could she own it? His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, for someone to deny what had just happened. But all he saw were averted gazes, panicked whispers, and the predatory gleam in the eyes of his rivals. He saw Lord Ashworth give Serafina a respectful bow as she passed his table. He saw Franklin Reed, the Swiss financier, stand up and shake her hand. These weren't just investors. They were her allies. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed coup de grace. Serafina, meanwhile, moved through the chaos with the serene calm of a galleon sailing through a storm of its own making. She did not rush to the exit. She glided a portrait of untouchable power. She paused to have a brief, quiet word with her lawyer from Whitlock and Finch, a stern-looking man in a Savile Row suit who had been posing as just another guest. She accepted a glass of water from a waiter. She was not fleeing the scene. She was taking a victory lap. As she neared the grand double doors of the ballroom, Garrett finally broke from his paralysis. Galvanized by a surge of pure, desperate fury, he stumbled after her, pushing through stunned guests. "Serafina!" he bellowed, his voice raw. She stopped and turned to face him, her expression one of mild inquiry, as if he were a junior employee with a minor question. "How could you?" he hissed, his face contorted. "How could you do this? Today of all days?" "On the contrary, Garrett," she replied, her voice low and even, for his ears only. "Today was the only day. You wanted a public spectacle of your triumph. You wanted everyone who matters to be in this room to witness your new beginning. I simply gave them a more accurate version of the story. This is my company, my life," he sputtered, his carefully constructed facade of sophistication shattering completely. "No, Garrett," she corrected him gently, but with a spine of steel. "It was your company. You were its steward. And in my opinion, and more importantly, in the opinion of the majority shareholder, your stewardship has become reckless. You leveraged my company's future for your own ego." The use of the words, "my company," was like a physical blow. He flinched. "I will fight you," he snarled. "I'll see you in court for the rest of your life." Serafina allowed herself a small, pitying smile. "You can't fight the numbers, Garrett. Your lawyers at Thornton and Beck are excellent at divorce proceedings, but I suspect they're about to be out of their depth. My team at Whitlock and Finch, on the other hand, are specialists in corporate governance and shareholder rights. The bylaws are quite clear. The vote on Monday is a formality. You can attend the board meeting as the outgoing CEO, or you can tender your resignation beforehand. The choice is yours. Either way, clear out your office by noon." Colette had followed him, her face tear-streaked, her mascara running. "You witch!" she screamed at Serafina. "You calculated bitter witch!" Serafina's gaze fell upon Colette, and the last vestiges of warmth vanished, leaving behind an arctic chill. "You wanted to be the queen of this kingdom, my dear," Serafina said softly. "You should have done your due diligence on who actually owned the throne. You married a man, but you coveted an empire. You'll get to keep the man, I suppose. But I'm quite sure the empire was what you were really after." With that final devastating cut, Serafina turned her back on the wreckage of their lives. Her chauffeur was waiting the door of the Bentley open. She slipped inside without a backward glance. As the car pulled away, she could see them through the tinted window. Garrett Lancaster, the titan of industry, standing dumbstruck and broken in the doorway of his own ruined wedding. His weeping bride clinging to the arm of a man who in the space of an evening had lost everything that truly mattered to him. The coup was complete. The reign of Garrett Lancaster was over. The reign of Serafina Lancaster had just begun. The Greystone Manor wedding didn't just end, it imploded. It would be forever remembered in the annals of Chicago high society as the Lancaster coup. Before Serafina's Bentley had even reached the end of the long gravel drive, the first news alert hit the phones of the financial elite worldwide. Bloomberg. Serafina Croft. Lancaster announces 51.8%. Controlling stake in Lancaster Holdings at CEO husband's wedding reception. Emergency board meeting called. The story spread like wildfire through the digital veins of the global economy. The Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, Reuters. They all scrambled their top journalists working the phones, calling every guest, every board member, every analyst they knew. The narrative was irresistible. The scorned wife, the public revenge, the corporate takeover. It was a drama of Shakespearean proportions played out in the world of billion-dollar logistics. By Sunday morning, the story was front-page news. Photos of Serafina looking impossibly poised in her sapphire suit were juxtaposed with shots of a haggard, stunned Garrett and a weeping Colette. The market, which loves stability and abhors a vacuum, was already reacting. Pre-market futures for Lancaster Holdings, LNC, were in free fall. Analysts were predicting a bloodbath when the New York Stock Exchange opened on Monday. Garrett and Colette spent their wedding night not in a lavish honeymoon suite, but in the sterile conference room of Thornton and Beck, surrounded by frantic lawyers. The Bulldogs were in a state of shock. They had been preparing for a standard, albeit high-value divorce. They had not been prepared for a hostile takeover orchestrated by the person they had assumed was the victim. They pored over corporate charters and shareholder agreements, their faces growing grimmer with each page. "She's got us Garrett," said lead counsel Robert Thornton, a man who had never admitted defeat in his life. He looked exhausted. "The share purchases are ironclad, routed through at least a dozen different legal entities over 2 decades. It's a work of art. Devious, but a work of art. The Serafina Croft Trust is the undisputed majority owner. The emergency meeting is legal. The vote is legal." "So what do I do?" Garrett asked, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. "You've got 2 options," Thornton said bluntly. "You show up on Monday and get publicly executed by a board that she now controls, or you resign. I'd advise the latter. It gives you the tiniest sliver of dignity to walk away with." Colette huddled in a chair, wrapped in a borrowed coat over her ruined wedding gown, just stared into space. Her mind couldn't process the sheer scale of the catastrophe. She had hitched her wagon to a star, only to watch it plummet from the sky. The power, the prestige, the penthouse, the private jet. It was all evaporating before her eyes. She was Mrs. Lancaster. Yes, but the name now felt like a liability, a brand associated with humiliation and failure. She was married to a man who was about to become the most famous corporate casualty in modern history. Meanwhile, Serafina spent her Sunday in quiet preparation. She was not at a spa or celebrating with champagne. She was in the boardroom of Whitlock and Finch, a space of quiet, old-world power with dark wood paneling and views of the Chicago River. With her was Phineas Croft, who had flown in from Zurich and her hand-picked legal and financial team. They weren't celebrating, they were strategizing. "The stock will plummet at the opening bell," said a young sharp analyst named David Chen, pointing to a chart. "The market hates uncertainty. They see a family squabble, not a transition." "Then we will give them certainty." Serafina stated, her voice calm and authoritative. She was no longer the silent wife. She was the commander. "Phineas, I want a press release ready to go out at 9:01 a.m., Monday the moment the meeting is called to order. It will announce my appointment as interim CEO effective immediately. It will also announce a temporary suspension of trading on LNC stock to prevent panic selling and allow for an orderly transition. The SEC will grant it, given the circumstances." Phineas nodded. "It shows responsible leadership. Furthermore," Serafina continued, The release will announce a full immediate audit of the Oakhaven acquisition and a strategic review of all high-leverage positions taken in the last 24 months. We're signaling a return to stability and fiscal prudence. We are not the chaos. We are the cure for the chaos. She turned to Lord Ashworth, who had joined the meeting via a secure video link from London. My lord, I'll need you and our other institutional allies to make statements of support. Express confidence in the new leadership. We need to project an image of a unified, stable front. It will be done, Serafina. The British lord said, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. The city was growing tired of Garrett's cowboy antics. A return to Croft family principles at the helm will be most welcome. The plan was meticulous. While Garrett was drowning in the wreckage of his personal life, Serafina was already governing. She was shoring up support, managing the message, and planning her first 100 days. She had spent 20 years in the passenger seat, but she had been reading the maps the entire time. On Sunday evening, Garrett Lancaster, a man who had never surrendered in his life, did just that. At 10 p.m., a single-page letter drafted by his lawyers was delivered to the offices of Whitlock and Finch. It was his resignation as CEO and chairman of the board of Lancaster Holdings, effective immediately. Serafina read the letter without a flicker of emotion. It was not a victory. It was a predicted outcome, a necessary step in her plan. She placed the letter on the table. "Get some rest, everyone," she told her team. "Tomorrow, the real work begins." As she was driven back to her hotel, the city lights blurred past her window. She felt not a sense of vengeful glee, but a quiet, profound sense of rightness. She had not destroyed Garrett's life out of spite. She had reclaimed her own. She had protected her family's legacy and the future of a company that thousands of people depended on. She had simply corrected a mistake she had made 20 years ago. The mistake of letting a man believe he was the source of her power, when all along the power had been hers to wield. The aftermath was messy, but the power play had been perfect. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzling, a somber backdrop for the final act of the drama. The lobby of Lancaster Holdings Tower was a media circus. Reporters and camera crews packed the marble expanse held back by a line of stoic security guards. They shouted questions at anyone in a suit, hoping for a quote, a crumb of information. The air crackled with anticipation. At precisely 8:45 a.m., a black Bentley pulled up to the private executive entrance. Serafina Lancaster stepped out. She was dressed in a charcoal grey power dress, her hair styled in its signature elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry, except for a simple classic watch. She projected an aura of absolute, unshakable control. Flanked by her legal team from Whitlock and Finch, she walked into the building she now owned, ignoring the clamour of the press. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a place of immense tension. The remaining board members, a group of powerful men who had been Garrett's allies for years, sat grim-faced around the enormous obsidian table. They had spent the weekend on the phone with their lawyers. They knew they had been outmaneuvered, and their allegiance, always a pragmatic calculation, was shifting towards the new center of power. At 9:00 a.m., sharp Serafina entered the room. Phineas Croft was at her side. She did not take the CEO's chair at the head of the table. Instead, she took a seat in the center, a subtle but clear signal that this was a new kind of leadership. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice filling the silent room. "As you all know, I have called this emergency meeting in my capacity as majority shareholder. We have received and accepted Mr. Garrett Lancaster's resignation." She slid a copy of the resignation letter down the polished table. "The first order of business is to restore stability and confidence in this company. Therefore, I am putting forward a motion to appoint myself as interim Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board, effective immediately." Phineas Croft, in his capacity as her legal counsel, seconded the motion. Serafina looked around the table, meeting each board member's eye. "Is there any discussion?" There was none. To argue would be pointless, an act of professional suicide. One by one they murmured their assent. "The motion carries unanimously," Serafina announced, her tone matter-of-fact. "The press release confirming this transition and the temporary suspension of trading has just been issued." She then spent the next hour laying out her vision. It was not a vision of vengeance, but of renewal. She spoke with a fluency and depth of knowledge that stunned the board. She detailed the company's financial exposure from the Oakhaven deal, outlining a clear, decisive plan to restructure the debt and divest from non-core, high-risk assets. She spoke of reinvesting in the company's core logistics technology, of employee welfare, and of a new era of corporate transparency. She wasn't just the money, she was the mind. She had been studying this company for 20 years, not as a wife, but as an owner in waiting. Garrett was a builder. She concluded, her tone measured, almost generous. But in the end, his ego outgrew his vision. Our new vision will be one of sustainable, profitable growth built on a foundation of stability, not speculation. We will honor the Lancaster name by making it synonymous not with risky gambles, but with reliability and value. Are there any questions? A hand went up. It was Robert Chen, the youngest board member. What about Garrett Lancaster's severance package? Mr. Lancaster's employment contract contains a standard morality clause, Serafina replied coolly. I believe his actions, which have caused significant reputational damage and jeopardized shareholder value, constitute a clear violation of that clause. Therefore, he will not be receiving a golden parachute. He will receive his vested pension as required by law. Nothing more. The message was brutally clear. The old king was not just deposed. He was exiled, stripped of his honors and his treasure. The fate of Garrett and Colette became a footnote in the larger story of Serafina's ascent. They retreated from the public eye, their names toxic in the circles they once dominated. Garrett, without his company, his power or his fortune, was just a man. Colette, the triumphant mistress, found herself married not to a titan, but to a pariah. Their new beginning was a quiet, bitter exile in a world that had once been their oyster. Weeks later, Serafina stood in the CEO's office. She had redecorated, replacing the cold chrome and grey with warm woods, comfortable furniture, and shelves filled with books. The view of the city was the same, but now it felt different. It was not a cage, but a kingdom. Her kingdom. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You took everything from me." She knew it was from Garrett. For a moment she felt a flicker of the old life, the ghost of the woman she had been. Then she deleted the message without replying. She had no more time for the past. She turned back to the window, looking out at the sprawling city, below a landscape of challenges and opportunities. The reign of Serafina Croft. Lancaster had just begun. And so Serafina Lancaster rewrote her own story. She transformed the ultimate betrayal into the ultimate victory, proving that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Her story is a raw, gripping reminder that a person's worth is never defined by their partner, and that the best revenge isn't loud and messy, it's strategic, silent, and absolute. She didn't just get even, she got everything. What did you think of Serafina's masterful plan? Was her revenge justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of epic revenge and empowerment, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger and more compelling than fiction. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for listening.